counties in Northeast Florida. And for me, my board does an annual performance appraisal of me using the Board Source tool, which has really been great, but it's also expensive. So thought I'd see, you know, what other tools there might be for the board to use that would still be meaningful.
Absolutely, thank you. And I do want to touch on that a little bit. I sent out some handouts this morning via email. If anyone didn't get that or wasn't able to download anything, let me know and I'm happy to put it into the chat. Catherine, do you mind going next?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Catherine with the Barnabas Center, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer here. And actually, Wanda was planning on joining, and she's not able to this morning, so I am jumping on so I can gather everything and get it back to her. Things are a little busy for her right now, a little crazy. I know most of you are probably well aware that we are getting ready to transition to a new CEO here at Barnabas very soon. And so things are moving in a lot of different directions right now. So I'm very happy to be here and take whatever information I can and bring it back to Wanda.
Catherine, all I can say is if I'm feeling stressed about Wanda leaving, I don't know how you guys are doing.
It's so funny because on any given day, I work with and I talk to most of the employees almost all the time. HR really is what I do here. And I have moments of, we're so happy for her. We have moments of, oh my God, what are we gonna do? You know, it's kind of like we're all kind of transitioning and working our way through it right now. We're all kind of all over the place, but we've got time to work it through.
Great, well, welcome this morning.
Catherine. Jill, do you mind going next?
Not at all. I'm Jill Dame, CEO at Leadership Jacksonville, and I am here. We have done a fairly lengthy evaluation of me each year with 3 people doing the evaluation, the executive team only. And I don't think that's very usual. I think more full boards do the evaluation. And so I just want to look for some other documentation and other suggestions and make sure we're doing a better practice if we can.
Definitely. Thanks, Jill. I think we'll be touching on that for sure. Donna?
Hi, everyone. Donna Lueders with Inc. Investing in Kids, and I'm the Executive Director here. I've been in the position for about 14 and a half years. We have loosely done an evaluation of my position, and we've gotten it a little more tight, but I still think that there is lots of room for improvement. We use a template from our consortium of education foundations, but I, am really interested in seeing what else is out there and strengthening the process of what we do.
Awesome, thank you for being here. Holly?
I'm Holly Hill, and I am here to support Donna. I'm on the executive board for Investing in Kids, but I'm also the director of digital strategy at Flagler College. And if you see my screen go black, we were all talking about the state of everything and everybody's mental state. It's because of me. Donut holes.
I love it. It wouldn't be a nonprofit center event without donut holes, so I love it.
I was like,
and I don't think donut holes count. I think only the whole, the whole donut counts, not the donut hole.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping.
Awesome. Thank you, Holly. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Janice?
Hello, good morning. My screen went dark a few times because I had to go fill this up before we got started, and I probably will have to run and grab a bite to eat as well. I am the board chair for TAG Children's Museum. I'm a business person. I own a business in town, but I have served on the TAG board for, 5 or 6 years now. I'm board chair, and since we're developing Children's Museum, we are developing our processes, and I see my position as really developing some strong foundational processes. We've been evaluating our executive director probably on a more informal scale, and I want to make sure we're doing it right. I don't necessarily know how to do it right, so I'm here to learn from all of you and find some great recommendations to start TAG off on the right foot.
Thanks, Janice. And I do want to quickly say, oh, go ahead.
I wanted to note, I have another meeting at 10, so I will have to slip out early, but I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, for sure. And we totally get it. And what I will say is we're recording the session and we'll be sending out the recording afterwards. So you'll definitely be getting a recording. I did just want to say, I love the county representation. We've got Nassau and we've got some St. John's, we've got Duval. I love it. And then Callan, I know that you're here as Nonprofit Center, but do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, all. I'm Callan. So I'm a program director at the Nonprofit Center, and I'm also just kind of hopping in for a little bit. I do a lot of our board programming, so I thought there might be some good takeaways to add to other programs as well, and resources to share with folks that reach out. So yeah, happy to just be here for a little bit. And good to see you.
Thanks, Callan. All right. So I think that's everyone. And then I think next we're going to go over the agenda, if I'm correct. Yes. So we do have a 2-hour session today. We are going to do a 5-minute break in the middle, so don't worry, where you can turn off your screen, go get some coffee, just not look at the screen for 5 minutes. So we're going to start off with breaking down the roles of an executive and a board and kind of understanding the differences there. We're going to then move into performance review and compensation, kind of an overarching view of the fundamentals and why it matters to invest into that. And then we're going to dive into the local and national data that we have, as well as the practices. A lot of that can be found in our kind of our benefits and compensation survey and report that I was mentioning. If folks haven't had access to at least the executive summary, I'm happy to share that in the chat if anyone would like access to that. If your organization took part in the survey, you actually get access to it for free. And if your organization didn't, there is a cost to that. So I'm happy to share that information with whoever would like it. Then we're going to move into some FAQs and helpful resources, and then make sure that we have time for a discussion and Q&A portion. And then obviously I'd love to just thank JP Morgan Chase & Co., who has been an amazing, not just funder for this work, but really an amazing thought partner in all the process, and not just through this work, but throughout the whole process, and really has pushed to make sure that this information is as accessible as possible to Northeast Florida nonprofit. So just big thank you to JP Morgan Chase for their support in this. And then I'm going to pass it off to Rena.
Okay, guys, as Isis said, first, thank you for joining us. Second, I hope that we're going to cover everything that you all just expressed as one of the reasons, or part of the reasons you're here. So I really encourage you to unmute and go, wait a minute, what about this? Ask questions. Janice, I am actually contemplating flipping a couple of our the progression to make sure we get to some of your questions, which I think would fall at the very end. So we'll just do our best to get through as much of the pertinent information as possible up front. Okay. So this lovely picture here in front of you is our iconography of what we do, our strengthening the nonprofits. And you'll see that we've divided the bottom half into 4 components: strong leadership teams, organizational learning and evaluation, access to capital, and advocacy and external awareness. These are the 4 components that the Nonprofit Center, through research and through talking to people like you all who are actually in the field, have developed as our core components of everything that we do to strengthen nonprofits or support in the community. And so we're throwing this shot up because today is really about strong leadership teams. When we talk about leadership teams, we're talking about the CEO and the exec. The exec and the board leadership, or the entire board. Usually we just mean like the board leadership and the exec as a tight partnership to get things done. But we also know that, for instance, where we'll be talking about today, and as Jill mentioned, many boards in the whole are the bodies that review an exec. So the reason we have chosen to focus on high performing leadership teams is because, well, as many of you know, since the pandemic, we've seen there can be an Achilles heel in an organization when the board is not supportive of the exec, doesn't understand the role of the organization, doesn't really understand the business model of the organization. So it's a two-way street, and that strong leadership pipeline through effective succession transition, and we're talking about succession at the board leadership as well, is integral for a board and executive success, expertise, engagement, alignment, and prioritizing strong management and talent development. And that's all has to do with really what we're talking about here today, how you support, evaluate, and compensate the executive leadership. We're going to sprint through some of these because they're things that you all, I'm sure, are really familiar with. But it's critical that we understand that there is this partnership between exec and the board. So I think ISIS is going to throw up a quick poll. So we're asking you all to just give us a quick yes, no, or unsure. Does your organization's board annually review the executive's performance? And does your board executive have annual performance goals?
So we'll take another few seconds for folks to answer. And I do just want to note that the answers are anonymous. Okay, so I think that's actually every. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end poll and share the results.
Okie doke. It looks like most of us have an annual review process, and that most boards and execs have annual performance goals. I actually think it's rare for the board to have annual performance goals, but when boards have a strategic plan, sometimes they use those as their goals for the year. Correct? Okay. This is just the normal org chart. One thing I think is important, I like this arrow between the board of directors and the CEO and exec to go both ways. I think that's the reality of the situation, right? There's times when the exec is helping the board set an agenda, and there's times when the board is helping the exec set strategy. And so that two-way street also means that there's room for alignment about performance evaluation and goals as well. And of course, we know that the board of directors has only one employee, and that's the exec. And so the line of, again, responsibility goes directly to the CEO and not to other volunteers or staff. These are, and Linda, you mentioned board source. This is the top 10 responsibilities of a board. And you've seen these in one form or another. The reason I wanted to bring these up is our old friend Chuck Loring, who some of you may have been to presentations by Chuck. Chuck usually asks the board to go through these top 10 and rank themselves. What do you do best? Are you good on purpose, mission, strategy? How are you on financial oversight? How are you in board recruitment? And every time he usually whispers aside to me or to whoever's there and says, you know what? The majority of folks are going to tell you that the worst thing they do is fundraise and support the exec or evaluate the exec. It's just a big gaping hole in the most organizations' competencies, most boards' competencies. And I'm just going to skip that slide because we want to move on to some of the more in-depth roles of the exec. We know about committing to mission, leading the staff. All of these things are roles for the exec. And I think they're actually not a bad way if you do not have some way to evaluate the exec, to start the conversation with your board about what are the roles of an exec, and thinking about sort of at the high level how your exec is evaluated. So just an idea, and we'll share these slides with you all as well. One of our folks that has really influenced some of the work we do is Mario Mannarino, who, and that could be actually a tennis player. I just blanked on his name. Is that?
Very close, Mario Marino.
Marino. I think there actually isn't a tennis player named Marino, but he, the Leap of Reason author, I suggest if you all are interested in sort of organizational learning, the Leap of Reason is terrific. So this is a leadership approach to boards and exec. Again, some of the things that we've highlighted in what we believe are part of strong leadership teams. And I think reinforce the idea that it's critical for there be evaluation and performance goals held to, for both the exec and for the board. And again, you know, I think that you can look at any of these ideas and say, yeah, that makes total sense. If we have an exec and a board that are accountable, both to themselves, to the organization, and publicly, that last bullet, liability and public scrutiny, the more public information that's available about organizations, the more I think it's important that we have transparent ways of evaluating the successes of the organization, and that's tied, of course, inextricably to the leadership, not inexplicably, but in it. And one thing I will mention is that the 990 form actually asks you to explain how the compensation of your exec is set. And I think we may have a slide a little bit more on that. But publicly being able to share what your goals are and how your leadership is held accountable, I think is super important. But why is it so hard? I again, going back to what Chuck Loring has said, you know, most organizations just find this really challenging. Does anybody want to jump in on why this is anecdotally seems to be such a hard thing to do if it makes so much sense? Holly?
Just from my own experience, I think it's twofold. One is it's hard when you really appreciate the executive director or the CEO or the leader. It's hard to critique, but that needs to be reframed because it's all about the benefits that occur when you can work through that process. But then I think on the board side, I actually really love the idea of the board setting their own goals and evaluating themselves, because I think the flip side of it is that boards are often comprised of people that have full-time jobs. And so sometimes time is an issue.
Right. And Holly, I would also, yeah, Linda, go ahead.
I think part of the challenge is having the right tool or having a tool that's objective for them to take out that personal relationship that they might have with their CEO. So I know several years ago, it was very hard and it used to be done by they used to do it differently. So some chairs would just do it. Some chairs would involve the executive committee. And then my most recent chair, 3 years ago, when he came in, he knew about Board Source, and he's like, he has used this tool in another nonprofit in another state where he came from, and he loved it. And he got the full board engaged. And that was for the first time, and we've done it for 3 years since. So I think for them, it was the tool and having a leader.
Yeah. Jill?
I feel like despite best efforts, you know, I give reports, I talk about what I'm doing at meetings, I, you know, am with them on committees. I think it's a hard process because you kind of nailed it a little bit in one of the earlier questions. I think some of the board, and despite good orientation, I feel like when it comes down to it a year later, when they're evaluating me, they're not really sure what I do day to day.
Yeah.
So they're not really sure, you know, what are those people sitting there in the office doing every day? And so I think they feel uncomfortable saying much one way or the other for fear it will expose that they don't know what I do.
Yeah, and I also think it's also a form of respect. You know, all right, I know that day in, day out, you're running this organization. So what gives me the right to criticize or to, you know, to look at what you're doing critically? And so again, going back to the idea where you start this, you know, great process where you're setting goals at the beginning together about what you will accomplish. The full board understands how those translate to your strategy, to your mission, to whatever. And then at the end of the year, it's not a surprise when, you know, it's time to evaluate and you're using those 5, 3, 10 checkpoints. You know, and it, you know, different organizations choose different methods, but I think that developing a tool, using a system, getting everyone comfortable with it, and this is something else that I'd suggest, and we'll talk about this a little later, is also not being afraid of the executive session. Having a board that's comfortable with, and you're calling an executive session, not for some desperate reason because they've discovered, you know, fraud or the exec has decided to leave, or, but you know, that's a regular thing. Hey, let's go into exec session if there's anything for anyone to talk about. But also when it comes time for an evaluation, there's this comfortableness with being an exec and having that open conversation. So, you know, there's processes and systems that can support a board in becoming comfortable with and actually expert in helping the organization achieve its goals through supporting the exec. Any other comments before we sprint on? Okay, great. Thank you all. All right. Let's see what time. It's 9:30. I think we can get through some of this, Janice, before you have to slip off. So what we're going to do is share the some of the compensation and demographics and information that you know, we've just completed and released. The survey was actually done in 2019. We every 3 years or so are doing a compensation and benefits report. And we know this is one of the things we get asked, please, can we get local data? There is a lot of national data available, but local data, I think, is super important for us to understand how we develop our talent pool and attract talent here locally. And so we do every couple of years go through find the funding, in this case from JP Morgan Chase, to do, we hire a professional research firm that does it quite extensive, which is why we only do it every 3 years, because people, I don't know, Cynthia, you might have been the one that had to do it at, Catherine, I'm sorry, at Barnabas, and it's a heavy lift for some organizations. So thank you all if you participated. But it's very important to you all and to us to understand local compensation information, but it also helps us look at how we're doing as a sector in terms of diversity, in terms of developing positions, and in the light of the pandemic, how do we define responsibilities for the folks that work for us in the field, and how are we compensating them, and is it a fair rate of compensation? So this year we had 101 organizations participate, which isn't a huge amount, but they were by and large they represented a large number of employees, 7,000 employees. The median budget was $2 million, which is way above the median budget for the nonprofit sector in Northeast Florida. But the good part about that is that they were very diverse. They helped us define 93 different job titles and get a really good look at benefit and compensation. The way this report is done, unless there are 6 responses to a particular job title, say if there are not 6 responses to a assistant program director, then it doesn't go in the report because there's not enough data to support it being an average and a median and in the different quartiles. And it also can mean that there's not anonymity. If there's only 2 people that are in this job, it's kind of obvious that who they are. So that's one of the reasons why you'll see that there are sometimes that we could not include jobs or positions because there weren't enough responses. Also, clearly, organizations without employees, which there are a lot of in the nonprofit sector, could not take this. So just to put it in context, we know there are about 8,000 organizations in Duval County, and they represent 72,000 jobs in Northeast Florida. So there is so what we've got is probably about a 10% look at that. And then in terms of budget size, this is from our state of the sector information. Almost 72% of nonprofits are under $500,000. So if you think about, there's probably quite a few organizations that have no employees and did not take the survey or weren't eligible to take it. And our survey participants by budget size, and you can find yourself in this pie chart, but it was pretty evenly distributed among different organization size, which again is not representative of the sector as a whole, but I think helps us find ourselves and have more of a context for compensation.
And Rena, we had a question come in.
Yeah.
Linda, I think the question is, did we use Comp Analyst for this?
No, it's a firm out of California that I cannot remember their name. They also do the compensation and benefits survey for our compatriots in Central Florida at the Rollins College. And so we've just started using them because they have a good track record with Rollins. So, but I'm happy to take other suggestions as well. So let's look at some of the data here. Annual expenses, average employees. So if your budget is up to $500,000, your average number of employees you reported were 3. And that makes a lot of sense. All of us know that a rule of thumb is the highest expense level you've got is going to be your personnel. And so we've got personnel obviously just climbing as our budgets climb. We asked questions about demography. So sector leadership is overwhelmingly white. 87% of the execs and 81% of all board members are white. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the impact on the communities we serve when the sector is overwhelmingly presenting as white? Sector staff are overwhelmingly female. Interestingly, the majority of board members are male, and male CEOs make more than female CEOs. We also noticed that you're more likely to have a male CEO as the organization's size grows, which is probably related to why male CEOs have a higher compensation rate than females. At a small organization level, that is not true. There's parity. At large organization levels, male CEOs start out earning female CEOs. The average CEO is 56 and has been in their role for 8.5 years. That's a really interesting statistic. I think that when I first started, and Jill, you probably can help me here. When I first started at the Nonprofit Center, they had just finished a compensation survey, and this was 2005. And I believe that the average age of the CEO was about 56, and that they had generally been in their role for 12 years. And at that point, there was all this research showing that there was going to be a mass exodus of leadership, and everyone was panicked and started developing interim executive director programs and CEO leadership training. And it didn't actually happen. And then there was some questions about whether the recession had stalled that. I think that the pandemic might have been another instance of delaying some leadership departures, but I think the dam might be about to break. I think, Linda, when you were talking about the toll and the saturation, I think it's happening at every level in the organization. And so something else to keep in mind for board members as they're evaluating their executives and supporting them. But only 28% of the organizations who responded to the survey expect to transition in the position in the next 3 years. But let's be honest, I don't think many execs share beyond a year out or even 6 months what their plans are. 39% of jobs in the sector that were reported pay less than $15 an hour. And median base pay for non-executive employees in the survey was $35,000. 84% reported salary increase budgets their current fiscal year, with an average increase of budget of 2.6. Now, this is 2019. So we have to really be thinking about what the pandemic's impact will be on organizations and on compensation. When it comes to practices and benefits, everybody has a non-discrimination policy, but 71% have one that includes gender identity and expression, and 81% have a policy that covers sexual orientation. Clearly, it's not expanded to the same language that, for instance, is in the City of Jacksonville's Human Rights Ordinance. I think that there's room for improvement. And Isis, maybe can you share in the chat the link to our LGBTQ policy guide. Thank you. 82% offer some type of insurance coverage. And 53% have completed an updated emergency succession plan. 48% have a non-emergency succession plan. Interestingly, again, I do believe the pandemic should have us rethinking these. Nobody I know of had in their policy handbook a pandemic procedures. But I do think in terms of, and some organizations have gone through risk assessment, that including the idea that key staff could be taken seriously ill through something crazy like an international pandemic isn't no longer crazy. So thinking about that. I asked Deirdre Connor and our staff to pull this together just because we've talked so much during the pandemic about who's an essential worker. And then I wanted to look at what might be an essential worker, someone who had to go to work every day and who was helping an organization really thrive, and whether or not they were at what the United Way's level of a survival budget or a half survival budget for a family. So you'll see this actually compares, for instance, we start here with a program assistant, custodian, food service worker, and a case manager, and what their median salaries were, and then compare those to ALICE wages, and then the striped bar there in the middle is $15 an hour. So ALICE, for those of you who don't know, stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. So this is the working poor, either a single person or a family. And this is what their budgets would, this is someone who's teetering on this, one health event or car payment or paycheck away from being considered in poverty. And so just to give you context, that the sector, a lot of our employees who work in the sector who are doing essential work are making, are living on a survival budget. We asked about the race and ethnicity of your leadership team, the CEO and or executive director, and of your board members. And we'll see there that, again, dominated by white people and with very low representation, particularly for people of color other than Black. So just for what it's worth. And then we broke the median base pay down for execs by organization. This is a chart that might be helpful for boards. But I do want to suggest that boards, as looking at this information, also dig deeper into, and which you can do in our report, and look for mission area, look at the number of employees, and find different comparables other than just the medians that are across the board in the sector. We know that there's differences between human services organizations, arts and culture, healthcare, and so on. This long, completely unreadable list is, we'll send out to you, but I pulled some highlights from it. This is benefits for an exec. Just about everybody pays for a conference fee. Some pay for professional development, reimburse travel and transportation, and cover your professional membership dues. Jill, you should push this one to, so that everyone's paying their leadership JAX dues, it would help your alumni. But interestingly, zero reported paying for home internet, professional tech purchases. Housing allowance is a little out there, but these are things that we might think about differently coming out of the pandemic, and our work styles are going to change. So it might be, again, something to bring up with your board and to think about with staff itself. So. And these are just some of the things we found out. Interestingly, 34% of CEOs or execs have a contract. And this is, I have a contract. I don't know if anybody else who's on the call has one. I'm happy to share the template. For me, it lays out the relationship with the board. And who's responsible for what, when the annual performance review has to be done by, what it includes, what the relationship, what the intellectual property rights are, that sort of thing. It's I actually recommend, particularly for CEOs or execs that have been in their position for a few years, to think about moving to a contract. So sorry, this is blurry. But just this is board member profiles. We see that there's a slight 10% more of board members are male, and that most are over 40 years old, which is not a surprise, really, if you think about when you can take time from your career to do serious volunteer work. And again, board member by ethnicity, 14% report Black. And again, this is we asked an organization to tell us what their composition was. So if it was me filling out the report, I might make assumptions about someone's ethnicity. It's not self-reported, but again, dominated by Caucasian or white board members, and very, very few people of color other than Black. And one of the, ISIS pulled this slide together for us. We use the Building Movement Project's Race to Lead report for a lot of research and background. And I think what we wanted to do is just tell you why it's important to know some of this data, that BIPOC leaders were 16% more likely to report that their race played a negative or slightly negative impact in their career advancement. And it's actually increased from 2016 to 2019, which is distressing. And between 2016 and 2019, white leaders report that their race positively impacted their career advancement. And Isis and I were talking about this, and we think this could be an awareness issue on both sides of the equation, whether you're a BIPOC leader or a white leader, that there's just more awareness that about what the structural impediments or biases might be. And white people in the sector are more likely to receive additional income like bonuses or cost of living increases, according to the Race to Lead report. So here's some data sources for you if you're doing comparables for your organization or for your leadership. The Florida nonprofits, the Florida Nonprofit Alliance has a compensation survey that's statewide. The Edith Bush Institute in Orlando has one for its region. And the National Council of Nonprofits has a whole source page on compensation. And they take it from a very legal perspective. It's what does the IRS regulations tell you? What's a rebuttable compensation theory, that sort of thing. I heard, I think it was Inc. uses their trade association data, or at least a form for doing their performance evaluations, but very often you can get compensation information from trade associations as well. And of course, national organizations like the Y, the Red Cross, Girl Scouts. You can also look at, I don't think there's any reason not to use a for-profit scale as well. I don't, there are, of course, singularities about nonprofits, but we are working in the same economic environment. So if there's a JBJ or a Business Journal or Chamber survey, I would suggest looking at those. And then custom comparable surveys, making that if having the governance committee or your board make 5 calls to 5 organizations with, either in the same mission area with the same number of employees, just find your own comparables, I think is always important as well, because there may be things that are pretty unique to your type of work that would be important. So before we take a quick break, I wanted to talk just briefly about Amendment 2, which is the $15 minimum wage. So it passed, and it calls for the state's minimum wage to, by 2026, reach $15 an hour. This year, the minimum wage will move from $8.56 to $10 an hour. And after that, it's $1 a year increase. And it requires an annual adjustment after that, pegged to the CPI. So we just want to take the pulse of the group. Is this something your organization is concerned about? And if you have begun to create a plan for how you'll implement this change, and are you interested in engaging with additional resources around this topic? You're welcome to unmute and share whatever your plans might be, if they exist.
Hey, this is Bill.
You know,
I have 2 thoughts on that. One of which is my historic observation has been going all the way back to when I first worked with the Older Americans Act groups in Jacksonville, is our government sources don't care. They literally are not going to make it. So they say, if you want to pay your employees more, we're not increasing your contract, so cut it from somewhere else. And half the reason why I saw women running most of those organizations, because they were willing to take the same amount of pay for years and years to continue providing services. So it's good that all of us try and think about this, because I struggle with it all the time. I look at it from the same point some of us do. If I don't pay my guys enough, they're going to go work for someone else. And in construction, they may leave for 50 cents an hour. So you have to really kind of keep an eye on that. Our big point that keeps most of the workers with us, because half the guys I've got are over 40, is we pay 100% of their medical and dental benefits. That's what keeps them. The other thing I don't really understand about the whole $15 an hour increase that is going to impact our clients is that most of the people we help are income based. And for the folks that get Section 8 vouchers, if their income goes up to $15 an hour, my assumption is their rent voucher is going to go down. And in some cases, they may be more in a hole. So I as much as I want to see a universal living wage, we're going to do it by brute force, because I don't know how many people it's going to help and how many people it's going to hurt.
Yeah, the unintended consequences, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts? I know that we're talking to the chambers of commerce to see whether or not they are going to be pulling together sort of how-tos, and we're working on how to do compensation planning, which this will impact. So.
And Rena, this is Linda. Aging Network, the Association of Area Agencies on Aging is working with our lobbyists to assess the impact on services to seniors, because that's where the impact is going to be, as Bill said, so that we can inform our legislators when it comes to them working on the budget. This year is going to be an impossible year, but after, as that increase continues to go up, the further impact on services. So I think it's important for the nonprofit sector to collect that data as best they can and use it as an advocacy tool to seek additional funding at the state and the federal level.
Yep.
There's a real point. Our employees do stuff that nobody else is willing to do. You know, when years ago, when the people running the Department of Elder Affairs in Tallahassee said, "Oh, we're going to put this out for bid and let the for-profit sector do it better," those guys gave it back after 6 months. They said, "We don't do unfunded mandates. We don't get creative. We're just doing what you pay us to do." And you know, in this whole affordable housing mix that we work in, most of the a lot of our employees and all of our clients struggle for whatever they are asking help with because they don't have decent, safe, and sanitary affordable housing. And this COVID thing has just impacted even more people that live in unhealthy housing because they're stuck inside just that much longer. And we make the argument all the time, well, you save money, you do this, that. Ultimately, I don't think anyone's really buying it yet. You know, if they bought it, they'd fund it. And at the point that they don't, they're not convinced that they're really worrying about those employees not showing up for work. You know, down here in St. Augustine with the service industry, you know, they're building a brand new hotel. There's no affordable housing for those employees. So my assumption is when that place gears up, they're going to steal employees from all the little, you know, B&B restaurants around and a couple of the established restaurants to go work in a new place. And we're going to have a shortage. But no one wants to talk about, well, what do we do to keep these people living safe to home? Because it's not their holistic approach. And it's definitely not, you know, the chamber may see it coming, but when they bring it up, they've got all the small business folks that go, yeah, but I can't afford to pay anymore. I'm going to be out of business. At a certain point, it's like, years ago, I went to Burlington, Vermont. I mean, this was back 40 years ago, and I was buying stuff at a store, and I said to myself, how do they charge this much for all of this? And this guy standing next to me, he said, we overcharge all the visitors that come. He said, it's how the rest of us can live here affordably. You know, at a certain point, you just, everybody raises it $1 across the board for whatever their product is, and it stays the same. You know, or we all agree, gee, I have to pay more so the people that serve my business remain here. But no one has stepped up to said that, yeah, that's a universal decision. They're all still hoping that the workforce will just take it on the chin and struggle as opposed to having a livable wage.
Wow. Well, it seems like there's plenty of room for advocacy on this issue. Thank you, Bill, Linda, and thanks everyone. And look for us to, you know, and it's an issue as you know, Bill just said. It's, you know, who wants to say that it's unfair for someone, you know, going back to that chart, that bar chart we showed where you've got Alice wages, and then up here is the $15 an hour. And how many of our, you know, the folks who get the lowest wages in our compensation survey are folks that work with children and work with seniors. And, you know, that's just kind of sad. Should Isis, I'm wondering if this, does anyone want to take just a 3-minute off-camera break? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, let's take just 3 minutes. We'll be back here at 10:05, 3-4 minutes, and we'll launch into the next section just to give us a break from staring at the screen. All right. Okay. All right. Thanks, y'all. See you in a few.
Right.
Should we march on? All right. Let me go back to share screen. All right, let's get to what I think is of keen interest to most of the folks here is sort of executive performance, the how-to. And let me just say that a lot of this is subjective, right? And every organization will make modifications, will change how they approach this based on what where they are in their organizational lifestyle life cycle, how long the exec has worked with them, how much advanced work they've done in terms of business planning, strategic planning, and where they are in their strategic plans. If you've just launched a strategic plan, you may have very large, vague goals that haven't gotten down to very specifics that don't necessarily tie well to a specific recommendation for a performance review, or vice versa. You could have, I know that, for instance, I was talking with an exec a couple of years ago and I said, so how is your performance evaluation managed? And she said, it's managed directly from our strategic plan. You know, we know that year 3 goals are X, Y, and Z, and I am responsible for X, Y, and Z. And if they don't happen, then that's a ding on my performance evaluation. So you can use different levels of planning documents, of in other words, there's all kinds of ways to insert evaluation and goals. So we're going to start with really the basics. And the first thing I would say is there an up-to-date job description. And, you know, Donna, I'm wondering if you were hired 14 years ago, if that job description has anything to do with what you do right now.
We did update
Okay.
the description a few years ago, but you know, I think it's also beneficial to evaluate that every few years because it does evolve constantly.
It does, yeah. So, and I think that's just a good practice in terms of succession planning as well, to make sure that the exec's job description actually has something to do with what the exec does day to day. The bullet point there says, does it incorporate organization specific requirements and expectations? I think we're pointing that out because a lot of people use a template either from maybe the nonprofit center or from a national organization. But thinking about organizational specific requirements and expectations is important. Next, does your board actually know that it's its job and what it means to evaluate the exec? And so going back to those first slides, and if you ever need the nonprofit center to do a 15-minute Zoom calls on board roles and responsibilities on performance review, we're happy to do that. But making sure your board is clear that it is part of their 10 basic responsibilities.
And Rena, Holly has a great question in the chat.
Okay.
Do we have any documents or resources around how to tie executive evaluation with the organization's strategic plan?
I'm trying to think. No, I don't. Does anybody else? I mean, for instance, at the nonprofit center, last year we passed a new strategic plan. So this year, my annual performance review, among my goals are specific goals that relate back to accomplishing key parts of the strategic plan. So we just are pulling from the strategic plan what we know is supposed to happen in the next 12 months framework that can be tied directly to my initiative. Does that help at all, Holly?
Yeah, so you do it on an annual basis.
Exactly. Does the organization have a vision, mission, values, strategic plan, performance goals, blah, blah, blah? So all of these things, these mission, vision, and values, and strategic plan, DEI goals, may or may not be appropriate for the executive's performance evaluation, depending on what the goals of the organization for the year. But I think having those in the board's superstructure, that the board knows that it's responsible for carrying out the mission, that the board knows that there are values of the organization, that the exec is in charge of making sure are reflected in the work of the organization. Those are things that could be expansively determined as part of the CEO's job and performance. If they're new to the organization, for instance, if you've just set values for the organization for the first time, you may want to say the CEO or exec's job for the coming year, or one of their goals, is to make sure that the organization incorporates the newly adopted values into the structure, the hiring practices, the the practices of our working with our clients or constituents. That could be seen as part of the exec's specific performance evaluation. And you can also flip that, Holly. We were talking about the board's performance evaluation. If the board has said, you know what, we've got to adopt these values, and how will they be reflected in our performance, so that by the end of the year we can actually benchmark whether we've made progress. So thinking about all of the things that are both the work of the board and the responsibility of the exec are open to including into the performance evaluation. What I would say is that the longer and more complicated it gets, the less comfortable the majority of board members feel in filling it out. And it goes back to that conversation we had, is why is this so hard? If you hand somebody a 3-page document and say, how well does Rena manage staff meetings with the staff or relations with the staff? People are going to go, I guess fine. Nobody's ever come to us and complained, So you have to think about what is, going back to that executive and board leadership relationship, what is it that you can manage and drive that will create the organizational success that you want to see. This kind of restates and gets more explicit about elements of an executive evaluation. Thinking about whether there's, are there elements of the job description, annual goals that are set either through a strategic plan, a business plan, an agreed upon fund development plan, a communications plan, those sorts of things. So planning documents. And what I want to point out is under annual goals, I believe that they should be mutually agreed on by the CEO and the board, either the board chair or a governance committee helps define mutually with the CEO what those agreed upon goals are, and then they're approved by the full board. You don't need the full board to have a discussion about what are the goals of the CEO for the year. I believe that that's part of that sort of leadership conversation. You can have it as a full board discussion. I would suggest that there be at least a draft created between the exec and either an executive committee or the chair or some designated leadership within the board that comes up with that draft set of performance goals and then are moved to the full board for discussion. It's important, and this is, I'll just tell you, the Nonprofit Center for years, the board chair and I would sit down and set my goals. And then that was it. And at the end of the year, those goals were brought back to the board and I was evaluated on them. We left out that middle step where we brought them back to the board so that the board for the entire year knew what I was supposed to be doing. We just thought, oh, well, the chair knows. So I do think, keeping the full board appraised of what is supposed to be transpiring is an important step in board engagement and accountability on both sides. I think the more information is closeted, and I think this might go to what you were talking about, Jill, the more that responsibility, information, and accountability is kept in a tight group, either an executive committee or the board chair, a little bubble of board chair, CEO, the more that is kept close, the less the board feels that they have any responsibility to make sure that things need to be accomplished, right? There's this assumption that it's being taken care of by that executive group or by the leadership. And so I'm a big proponent of, I think we already talked about executive sessions, at least being offered at, in the case of the Nonprofit Center, we meet quarterly. And an executive session is always put on the agenda, whether we actually hold it or not. And I think that also opens up the conversation when staff's not in the room and controlling the agenda, for the board to ask the questions that they maybe don't feel comfortable asking in front of the experts, AKA the staff. And I think that also goes to having that openness around how were our, oh, I beg your pardon, how were our goals set and what are they and what's the benchmarks or metrics that we'll use to achieve them, and having a full discussion at the board about those. Does that make sense? So that goes to the idea of the process. What is the process that, and again, this is an important part of thinking about your transparency with the IRS, with reporting to funders. How is it that what's the process for evaluating the CEO? And what is the process for reporting their compensation? And how are those two things linked? A self-evaluation, if there is agreement on what that set of standards or goals are for the CEO or the exec at the beginning of the year, then the exec should also be asked to say, how'd you do, before the board weighs in. I think a self-evaluation for me is one of those important moments where I actually have to spend time reflecting on what was accomplished and what is it that I forgot to tell the board about, and what is that huge expanse of work that maybe was related that they didn't have knowledge of. So self-evaluation, I think, is a huge tool for both the exec and the board. And then the evaluation itself, the written assessment by the board. We've just moved with the pandemic to a SurveyMonkey tool for the board to fill out, and we will not go back. We used to distribute either at a board meeting a written evaluation or send a Word document out. The board itself said, oh my gosh, this is so great to have the SurveyMonkey because it aggregates the data for the board, as opposed to someone getting handed 15 packets of information. So Isis, are you gonna take us into this?
Yeah. So we're going to do a little bit of a discussion portion, and we know that sometimes getting into the discussion can be hard to do in a kind of group setting. So we're going to start with a scenario to kick us off. So the scenario in front of you is you just became chair of an arts organization that is run by its founder and has 3 staff members. You became the board chair after being on the board for only 1 year. It has come to your attention that the board has never formally evaluated the CEO, the founder, and doesn't seem too concerned about it. So I think this is something that a lot of folks may be familiar with, whether in your current board, in your current organization, or an organization you've been part of in the past. So if you go to the next slide. So we're going to break you up into 3 breakout rooms. And we would just love for you to discuss what you would do in the situation and how would you approach starting to address this, and maybe even pinpointing why the board and the executive are reluctant to participate in an evaluation process. And so I think we've started to touch on this a little bit already, but we would love for you in these groups to really identify 2 to 3 key takeaways that you can come back to the rest of the group and share. And those key takeaways can be either about why the board and the executive is reluctant to participate in the evaluation process, but also how would you begin to approach kind of rectifying and getting that organization on the right path to have an appropriate evaluation process for the executive. So I have you in your breakout rooms. Does anyone have any questions before I open those up? Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna break you out, and Jill, I see that. So I'm gonna move you. Okay, awesome. So everyone should be joining your rooms.
Are we the only ones left?
We've got one more breakout room coming.
Oh.
Up.
Everybody left.
All right, so it looks like everyone should be back. Hi there. Okay, so I'm gonna just call on your room and who is in it and ask whoever is speaking on behalf of the room to share their takeaways. So Holly and Samantha, who for you is gonna share?
Do you want me to go, Sam? Oh, okay. So we talked about first addressing the concept of the fear behind the CEO or the executive director and the evaluation process, and reframing the conversation and going into that discussion with research. So instead of it being, let's just use my name, Holly is saying you need to do an evaluation. No, it's the industry, it's best practices. It's not an individual person or a group of people, it's the industry that is, so that it takes the pressure off of that fear. And then Samantha talked a lot about, you know, aligning the evaluations with your strategic plan. So it's like almost like a seamless process between the evaluation and the strategic plan.
That's great.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, and I also think that approach about, you know, hey, we have all this information that tells us it's a best practice, but I also think that framing it as a way to support the exec. It's not about looking for ways to, you know, point out your flaws. It's a way for us to find out what you intend to do and how do we help you get there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Catherine and Lee.
I don't mind going, Lee, if you want me to go ahead. We went ahead and we talked about getting back to basics and really starting at the bottom of the barrel. If this is something that's never been done at the organization before, it would be good to take a pause and take a moment to identify whether the board is aware of their responsibilities, where they land, and then what is expected of the CEO, and define that relationship. And I think once you start talking about the basics of what this relationship should look like, and everyone kind of gets on the same page with that, then I think the board would have an obligation to take it to the next step and define, is there a job description? Are there goals? And does all of this tie into the mission and the vision and all of this? Are there systems in place? Are there forms? Are there policies? I think it's just very presumptuous to think that, well, we've never done it for 3 years, we're going to do it tomorrow. You just can't. You just really have to start way, way back and take a pause and look at what's in place. And then if you get buy-in and say, listen, we need to fix this. This is going to be good for you. This is going to be good for us. We're all going to know where we're driving the bus, and we're going to help each other. So we talked a lot about, and Lee was really great because I was talking about getting back to the basics, but she said, really, let's talk about defining that relationship between the board and the CEO, because that really is where we have to start. So that's kind of what we thought. And of course, it's piggybacking onto what Holly was saying, continuing that conversation going forward. Once you kind of get all of your nuts and bolts in place, just keep that conversation going. So that's our 2 cents.
I love that, Catherine. Thank you. And I just to feed off of that, but it's kind of the culture of learning for your organization, right? And I do want to say for us at the Nonprofit Center, we do offer a free quarterly board roles and responsibilities training that's free to members. So kind of thinking about doing all of that learning and driving that for the organization can be hard, right? And so thinking about, we are here as a resource and as an asset to hopefully be a part of that learning for you all. And as you said, getting back to basics. So there are resources out there for sure. Bill and Donna, do you mind wrapping us up?
Now, we had talked about board engagement and how easy it is for those of us who have been in our positions for a very long time to just take the ball and run with it, and not fully engage the board or just ask them individually, oh, can you help me with this or can you help me with that? But collectively getting them engaged for more ownership to propel the organization as it stands to the next level.
That's great. That's great. I do know that, I remember there's an exec who's retired once, and we were having a conversation about how she's evaluated, and she says, I tell them how well I did, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay.
And all of this is easier said than done.
Yeah.
Because, you just, your day gets absorbed with your to-do list. And so, how do you, I guess the biggest challenge is, how do you set time aside to really do this work? Because it's not something that can be done in 8 hours, or in a day. It takes a lot of time.
Absolutely. And I think that, goes back to the idea that, that a process is critical, because once that process gets going, it actually gains some momentum, the flywheel, so that it's not necessarily someone stressing to initiate and do the background work and so forth. Here we're just talking about, just again, what I was saying, that's every organization is going to land somewhere different on what are the key indicators that you want to be including in your evaluation, but they also could change from year to year. So qualitative and quantitative performance factors, measurable goals or intangible qualities. And so key considerations, making sure that you're staying within the boundaries of what is possible and what the board actually, and the board and the exec, what that relationship is, instead of the board sort of wandering down into programmatic and staff and operations and management, but thinking about this is our one employee, and this one employee is actually managing the entity. So what is it that we do to measure the success or non-success of that employee's management? And I think bullet number 3 is really important to sort of keep an eye out for self and group biases, things that that are may not be thought of as harmful, but that in aggregate can be harmful. And we're talking about biases that could include presumptions about whether a female staffer versus a male staffer needs benefits, right? Or presumptions about, well, Rena's been with the organization 15 years. She really, she doesn't need any more salary adjustments because she and her husband are nearing retirement, or, whatever those biases are, just be on the lookout for those. And someone, Catherine, somebody with your experience, I'm sure that, you could help a board, particularly for a larger organization, start being on the lookout for, hey, that's totally inappropriate, if not illegal, for you to be functioning under those sorts of assumptions.
Well, I have a question for you. We have a process in place right now where in our evaluations, I'm just talking about our staff, that we have a reviewer that's in place. So we try to avoid some of that self-group biases. And I'm usually the reviewer, or Wanda, reviewer, or sometimes it might be both of us, just to kind of look at these evaluations before they're given to staff. How would you handle something like that at the CEO level?
I think that's a great question. Right now, we're working with a consultant out of nonprofit HR to look at our staff review processes for exactly that reason. What are the biases that we may have in that, or how do we develop a more transparent system so someone understands, okay, I was promoted to this level and I don't know what the difference between that level and this level is, or so I would consider an outside expert if the exec felt, or the board or a board felt, that there were biases at work here. Let's just have somebody review our process from the outside, and it could be something that you again build into an automatic process. Let's just have them look at it every 5 years or something, so that it's not an expensive endeavor, but it might just give you that, also have the force of an outside expert advancing the process. Hey, you're no longer keeping up with times, and today's world, we don't ask that question, or we don't make those assumptions. And so that's a great question, Catherine. And that would be my guess at a response. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on that. The last bullet, consider gathering input from staff or community sources. This could be a 360, or I know that sometimes when you're hiring a new exec, you'll bring in outside voices to participate in maybe an interview or a conversation and get feedback from them. It's not a bad idea to do this at periodic intervals, particularly if I think what you want to do is normalize the process so that it does not appear to be a retaliatory, we don't think you're doing well with donors, so we're going to organize a donor input group before we do your next evaluation. Or, there's been grievances from staff, but if it's every 4 years, we're going to do a 360 and include key staff, key volunteers, something like that. That could really help also bring to light things that are strengths that you may not have identified with the exec. So what to evaluate? I think we're going back to let's make sure it's a collaborative effort in terms of setting the goals and a self-evaluation as well as an evaluation. The process should include a way for all parties to understand what success looks like and to adapt the measures if we've had a pandemic perhaps that maybe is interrupting what those goals or achieving those goals might look like. Alignment with the organization's goals, and then checking with similar organizations like the Nonprofit Center. We sometimes gather sample forms from other folks. So you can always check with us and see what we have. Or if you want to find organizations that are similar to yours, hey, we'd love to talk to 3 other arts organizations about what their process for evaluating their CEO is. Can you recommend 3 that look sort of like us? We're happy to help with any of that sort of comparability work. So who should be involved? The board chair, and it could be, the executive committee. In the Nonprofit Center's case, we have very, very limited roles for our executive committee. We believe that they only meet twice a year, and it's for specific purposes. And the governance committee is the initiator for our process of evaluation. The board chair and the exec set the goals together. The governance committee manages the process of disseminating the goals, receiving feedback, managing the distribution of the performance evaluation, collecting those, and then sharing that. So our governance committee is anything that has to do with the board's work, it falls into their lap. We do believe, and I wish Jill was here, that every board member should have some opportunity for input. Many of us, I'm wondering, the Nonprofit Center has between 12 and 15 board members. Usually, I think it can get challenging when you've got 25 people. Lee, I'm wondering how big the board is at the zoo.
So we typically, we have a pretty big board. We try to carry around 30. So our executive committee is about 13, and that doesn't include staff. So yeah, it's pretty big. And then looking at the numbers compared to some of the other nonprofits just in the Northeast Florida, just as far as revenue, I'm blown away just by even where the zoo is.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think that the larger the board, the more complicated the process can be. But I would hold that there is room for input from every board member to legitimize the evaluation. And again, if it's targeted and discussed from beginning to end, and the self-evaluation is made available to all board members, there shouldn't be a challenge with making the evaluation process open to every board member. So I started to tell you a little bit about what the Nonprofit Center does. I am sharing this only because we're always looking to get better too. And this has been an iterative process for us. I told you that at one point we realized we hadn't shared out the CEO's goal with the full board, and next year we fix that. Excuse me. So the way our process works is Q1, the exec and the CEO, the exec and the board chair sit down and come up with our goals. Actually, at the end of Q4, we have a discussion about setting the goals for the new year. We bring in Q1, we bring those goals to the full board for discussion and approval. The governance committee initiates the performance review in Q3. The governance committee takes a look at what the performance evaluation document is, what the questions are, and tweaks it and changes it if they wish, and brings that back to the full board if they do change it. If they don't change it, it goes out electronically and is distributed with directions to return it to the governance chair. So the governance chair directly receives the survey information. The full board participates in the performance evaluation, and the governance chair then summarizes that electronic information and meets with the board chair to discuss it. At an executive session at the end of the year in Q4, the board sees the full survey, discusses it, and then they have a compensation discussion after that. The board chair, and I should say that there have been times when we've inserted the governance committee has done research on compensation practices. That doesn't happen every year. Every couple of years they've asked, particularly when we've released a new study for compensation benchmarks for them. And so that's also presented to the full board. After the full board meets in executive session, the board sets up a meeting with me, and we discuss the evaluation and compensation. And after that conversation's done, we move on to the new annual goals based on, and I'll honestly say I initiate usually. I come with a draft in mind. And I think part of the important thing that happens here is this. I have a monthly one-on-one with the board chair, and we start with reviewing those annual goals and seeing where we are on them at our monthly meeting. And that ongoing relationship, I think, helps drive board meeting agendas, priorities within the board where they may be saying, hey, this is just not reasonable, goal 3. It has to be an ongoing way of defining both the CEO's work and the relationship with the board. And it all seems to actually lend itself to a more concrete and productive relationship between the board to go through this process. I'd like to stop for a second and just ask, I'd love to hear what the process might be in your organization. If there's something that you want to add to this, if you'd like us to, as I said, we're always trying to learn as well.
I'll add my 2 cents. I am terrible about even setting goals. I am so cynical about our funding fickleness of our funders that I don't see the point. I just kind of say, if we have an opportunity, we're going to take it. Whether it's working on a number of homes or working with people in a credit counseling program or finding money for our credit counseling services. It's so varied from year to year, and COVID has just kind of exasperated that to, the nth degree. But, when I've looked at doing this, and the board, I admit I have a very weak board in the sense that they don't tell me what to do about anything. They just kind of listen and go, oh, okay. I've always struggled to come up with a strategic plan or anything else that even remotely looks like what it did in January when I get to December.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all based on our funding goes up and down.
Right.
We went back to Hurricane Matthew in 2016, and the county came to us and said, can you spend $1 million in 7 months? I didn't plan that. We just did it. And I just, maybe I don't know how to define goals very well, because I think in units of production or funding cycles, but it's just really hard for me to, look at that sort of thing and have a discussion with the board that isn't just fantasy.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know what other advice folks have for Bill, but for me, the goals don't necessarily have to be tied to you will raise X amount of money, or you will, but if, if you have internal or external priorities in your head, this year, I have to get this done. I have to make sure that we have a staff retreat, or I have to make sure that the budget is passed by date certain, or that I'm going to develop a relationship with newly elected state leaders. The goals, I think, don't have to be focused on things that you feel like you can't control. And you could use this as a way to help the board understand and play a role in smoothing out what is a roller coaster world for the majority of us this year more than ever. So you might even think about starting with post-pandemic goals. I'm going to figure out a way to create safe protocols, and have them in place by September X, from now on for our workplaces, or, things like that, that are totally with, you feel like you can even start with things that are totally within your control. But bringing the board in on them and then saying, hey, it did work, we did get this done, is I think it's the beginning of the process. I don't feel like you can't set goals that because our world is so wacky, there are things that you're going to have to accomplish. It might be hiring a new person. It might be, speaking to the press 3 times to make sure they understand the work of the housing partnership. Any other thoughts, ideas?
Holly had a great comment in the chat around the kind of support that the Nonprofit Center could potentially provide to Bill around developing a strategic plan.
Well, we do how to do a strategic plan.
And y'all have offered, a lot of it, as much as I joke about all this stuff, ultimately it comes down to me. If I'm not going to take that aspect seriously enough to do, like I started last year to say we need a succession plan, because I hit 65. I've been here for 25 years. At some point, I'm going to get hit by a truck or want to leave. And then the pandemic hit, and I actually was talking to the Clarity Transition folks who had some great ideas. I just didn't have the energy to add that to what I was doing. So I just said, all right, if I'm prioritizing things and nobody's pushing me, the board said come up with a succession plan. So I copied one that a friend had, just so I would have something in writing, because when the government looks at it, They don't know enough to evaluate it. They just want to know you have 14 pages and it's called a succession plan. I never get feedback from those people on anything that we write. So I just, but if I don't make it a priority, it's not going to happen. It's just flat and simple. I don't have a board driving me to say, you got to do this, you got to do that.
Well, if you want to dive in and create those goals and then share them with the board, they'll certainly know what to hold you accountable for. Holly, did you have a comment?
It was more of just a comment of like, I'm sorry, Bill, that you've been put in that position, because I am in St. Augustine and I'm acutely aware of what services you provide. And it's unfortunate that you don't have the support of your board, because these are lives, these are people's lives.
But I haven't built it. It's not that it's not there, but if I don't build it, if I don't make the time to lead the board in that direction, they haven't had any training about what a board should do or what a board should not do. I mean, those are all things that are essentially on me to initiate. And I look at, they'd all, within their time constraints, they probably do a lot more than they do. But if I don't drag them into it, if I don't ask them and say, let's do this, and I don't do that, because if I can't put it together well, I don't want to give them a half-assed idea.
Well, I mean, one thing that Donna does really well with us is things like partnering us with the nonprofit center, utilizing things like the consortium, which is for education nonprofits, and allowing experts to kind of help lead versus her being the one to do everything.
And you know what? Sometimes, Bill, when you're looking at something that is so overwhelming, it's hard to know where to start. It's so, you're looking at the whole thing, and maybe your first goal is, I'm going to commit to saying 1 hour out of my week every week is going to be to start working and developing on this, or reaching out and setting up time with Rena or someone at the nonprofit center. Maybe that's just your first goal, because what you're looking at, I'm thinking about how you must be feeling, and I would not want to be in your shoes, because you must feel isolated, a little bit afraid. What if I do fall off the face of the earth? What have I done to protect not just this organization, but the funding and the people I'm helping? So when you start really going down that road, it could be a little scary. So maybe your first goal and your first commitment is 1 hour a week. That's it. 1 hour every 2 weeks. I have got to start making something happen. That's how I would try and approach it, because
I agree.
You got a bite are really hard, and you run away. You look in the other direction because it's too overwhelming.
And I love that both Catherine and Holly recognized how important the work you're doing is, Bill. And so it's easy to say, hey, it's way more important for me to raise money to get more housing, affordable housing, or to be lobbying here, or to be, than working on my own performance evaluation of the board. It's a really, and in fact, there's research that they asked, I think, about 5,000 executives, and they said, tell us about what gives you energy in your work. And they listed a whole bunch of things, but the top rank was, of course, actually getting something done with the program or constituents. And on the other end of the spectrum, the lowest thing, what gave you the least energy or sapped your energy, was working with a board. And overwhelmingly, exec said, it's not the people, it's the idea that you're moving away from what your mission is. So, I see people have to split. So let's, I did want to share with you guys, there's a couple of next steps. You can find the compensation report here. And if you're not a member, the executive summary is still available for free. I think, Isis, you wanna take us home?
Absolutely. And just a virtual round of applause to Rena, our awesome facilitator, for the day. I did put the survey into the chat. I do want to mention, so before anyone jumps off for the day, at least click on the link, and that way you have it and you can fill it out during the day whenever you have time, but just make sure that you click on that before you jump off the meeting. So I do want to touch on a few events that we have coming up that are pretty exciting. We are launching our Jesse Advocacy Series in late January. We're going to be launching our updated Repositioning for Strength report, the research that we've done around how the nonprofit sector has been impacted by COVID-19, as well as some really important other information that we've been gathering from philanthropists as well as the rest of the nonprofit sector. So if you want to get access to that, it's going to be on January 26th in the afternoon from 3:30 to 4:30, and that is free and open to the entire sector. So if there are other nonprofits that you know that would want to get access to that, or board members, please make sure that you share this with them. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. We do offer a board roles and responsibilities training that is free and open to all of our members, and it's virtual as well as all of our other programming. But again, this is explicitly targeted to board members, so definitely take advantage of that if you're looking for a way to either onboard board members or just a refresher around, as Catherine was mentioning earlier, kind of the foundations and getting back to basics. Our third and final training around the compensation and benefits report is going to be on February 5th, and that's going to be around developing a compensation plan. So it's going to be really taking some of the concepts that we've been talking about. As I mentioned earlier, we did promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion through compensation as our first session. Now we're doing CEO performance evaluation as our second. And so kind of looking at how do you tie that all together and really look at developing that compensation plan for your organization. And that is also free and open to all nonprofits in Northeast Florida. And then the last one I'll mention is Nimble Budgets. This is kind of our updated budget basics training that's kind of foundational look at how do you develop a flexible budget for your organization. And that's on February 18th from 9 to 10:30 a.m. So that's all I have. And with that, I just want to say thank you. And I see people are jumping off. So thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thank
Thanks,
you, everyone.
Ashley.
I got to head out. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Bye.
Alrighty. Bye, guys.
Bye.
All right.